This presentation is a bit different than what I usually do because I've done so many site visits over the last 8 months that I wanted to actually talk about them because we'd been coming out of COVID, a lot of restrictions, and a lot of people weren't going out. I was going out, but it was harder to get out of North America. So I spent a lot more time in Canada and the States, but over the last 9 months, lots of trips to South America and to Europe. So let's just get going here. Okay, so bargain hunting, given the current environment, is something we're all interested in, especially myself. And these require site visits because you do have the time because the market sucks so much that nothing's going to change rapidly. But site visits, integral part of the evaluation process. This market, it lets you get out there and do them before you actually purchase. So again, like I said, travel is more difficult. 2021, it's opened up. I can tell you that when I went to Brazil in March, the site visit I went on with was the first one that a lot of brokerage analysts actually left Canada. And it was their first site visit that their own firms allowed them to go on to. So that's just been starting for them. So, since restrictions lifted, mostly in January, although I did go to Argentina for Christmas, even though they told me not to, 10 site visits, Brazil, Alaska, Yukon, Ontario, Nevada, Arizona, Argentina, and Spain. And again, grassroots to production, precious base metals, and PGMs. A common theme about all these companies before I would do the site visit was the management team. So just assume that all the 10 companies I visited, there were no issues with the management team because it's just not worth going through immigration, security, putting a mask on for 10 hours and seeing somebody you don't trust. So in today's exploration, my presentation, I'll just run through a pair of companies that, that I did make a move on during the summer. Okay, so just background, I'm just going to do this quickly, but this is year-to-date numbers of the asset classes I follow, and the biggest spike, basically natural gas, driven a lot by the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and that also has impacted volatility in the markets. It's also impacted uranium prices now because people are trying to get off of natural gas, and it's energy as well as impacted crude oil. But interestingly, it's also impacted the strength of the dollar. So I get why the dollar's up because of higher interest rates and all that's going on. But the other interesting twist, which natural gas prices pushing down the euro on a trade-weighted basis, pushing up the dollar. So that was an interesting little tweak there. But most commodities are down, even, nickel, palladium's up a bit, even though that Russia obviously produces both of those. So other than that, most commodities, most asset classes have been negative year to date, and the equities have suffered more than the underlying commodity. So for example, gold's down at this point less than 5%. The GDXJ is down like more than 20%. So that leverage, cuts both ways. So if we look at the 10 companies I visited, commodities underpinning these carbon neutral strategies that being implemented and forced, ad hoc, mind you, is what I'm looking at. Your copper, golds, nickels, PGMs, over precious right now. And royalty companies over precious metal producers because of the margin squeeze that I've been seeing. Some have been telling me and have been showing in their Q2 results that with the oil price sort of flattening, they're seeing less pressure on margins. So that could help some of these precious metals producers. It wasn't hurting the other base metal producers as much because they were seeing the revenue growth, but now they're not seeing that. And so we might see a little bit of a squeeze there. Project stages, like I said, grassroots, Sable Resources in Argentina, Snowline, Kodiak, Pan Global, Western Alaska Minerals, to resource stage, Bravo in Brazil, Arizona Copper in Arizona, and development, Generation Mining in Ontario, and production, Aero Resources, which is the biggest market cap company here in Brazil, and a royalty play, which would have been Origin, looking at the Silicon project being advanced by AngloGold. So as you can see, most of them are negative. A few have more than exceeded the benchmarks, so that are driving all that year-to-date performance over 20%. The base metal index is down 12% over that same period, and the GDXJ, and I converted this into Canadian because everything here is Canadian, and there's not much of a difference. So it's not like we're seeing a big Canadian bump from the US dollar going up, because most of the cross is in the euro that's driving the Dixie to be 14% up. So the first one, I'll say, is Arizona Sonoran Copper. It's a copper project in Arizona. And the reason I took a position in it was I was a big believer in Trilogy Metals. And I'm still a big believer in the project. Right partners, South 32, the Nana Corporation in that part of of Alaska. But the problem is that the U.S. retracted the 211-mile road permit. And that, for me, was unprecedented. It wasn't like they were slowing the permit application, which took several years, which was, I don't know, a 1,000-page document that was already permitted. They actually took it back. And for me, that raised a lot of red flags for the U.S. And so when I looked at the U.S. in terms of copper projects, I wanted private ground. And so Arizona Sonoran Copper was all on private land, and that was my big reason for switching. The investment thesis was basically potential for significant resource growth at Park Salyer. And so this was an old project that was mined before. Obviously, the copper price has changed, but they're finding enrichment in other parts that weren't drilled as much as the Cactus ground. Again, private land, very important in terms of permitting, federal versus state. All the states want development. Most of the federal government right now in the current administration, it's a bit harder. Water access, the drought conditions in that part of the world are dire. And so getting potable water for a mining project is next to impossible. You're at the lowest part of the rung. So having water access is huge. And not just water access to drill, but potentially to put your project into production for M&A. You need that. And that's very important for M&A. Because if you have a project with no water access, you're basically, you're screwed. So potential for consolidation. So in the meantime, they've got a land package that's, to the northeast goes right into the township of Casa Grande, but to the southwest, one of the biggest IPOs over that couple of months was Ivanhoe Electric that raised 169 million US. And so most of that money was raised to fund their Santa Cruz project, which sits right southwest of Park Salyer, which is Arizona Sonoran. So now you have the loudest, I won't say loud, but, prominent player in the copper industry, Robert Friedland, with his new entity, Ivanhoe Electric, taking notice about this area of Arizona and who's got the ground to the northeast, who's got water rights, and who's potentially got a shallower deposit, Arizona Sonora. The other thing is that they got a private placement by Rio Tinto's technology arm, Newton, that looks at treating sulfide ore, which is something we used to do at Phelps Dodge a lot and try, which never worked, was doing the solvent extraction electrowinning of sulfide ore at surface and not sending it to a smelter. So they want to test their ore for that. Right now, Arizona Sonora is not even thinking about developing the sulfide. But if it did, that would open up another window of resource upside. Big catalyst for them right now are drill results, because they're drilling Park Salyer, and they just put out some new results at the beginning of the week. And then before end, we should see the resource. And so as you can see, in terms of the graphic here, this was very important, but nobody knows much about what WOTUS means. So WOTUS means the waters of the United States. So if you have groundwaters that are considered the waters of the United States, you need a 404. And that permit is federal. So getting the U.S. Corps of Engineers to tell you you do not have any WOTUS water is big, because that takes out that federal permit. So otherwise, it's a lot of results from enriched at Park Salyer, 145 minutes at 1.3, 77 at 1.3, 82 meters. That was a recent hole about 1.8. And then this other hole right now is 150 meters of 1.1. And this is going to the ground that Ivanhoe Electric has. Okay, and this was my site visit around there, right around the time that Ivanhoe Electric closed their IPO. Okay, so this is the land package, which is about 50 kilometers southeast of Phoenix. I used to live in Phoenix, and most people avoided Casa Grande in the early 2000s. They wouldn't stop there. There was no reason to. Now Casa Grande is a much bigger town, a lot of development that we'll get into, but you can see enterprise value of this company is around 80 million. Year to date, down 20%. Big project, Cactus, Park Salyer, Porphyry Copper, Arizona, PEA stage. The big issues in terms of risk are obviously the drill results, as in any company that's doing this, but also the oxide enriched metallurgy. You want to make sure you get good recoveries, which they're doing. Permitting, which is benefited by the fact that they don't have to deal with this WOTUS. The other thing is financing, but they've been helped by Rio on this. And getting Robert Friedland as your next door neighbor puts more eyes on your story. Land acquisition is huge as well, because this is all private land, which is what you want. But you have to talk to individuals to get it. So their ground, basically, if the porphyry trend is this, they abut development. So there's not much more room this way. This is where Ivanhoe Electric is. And this is where the growth is right now for these guys. Okay, and on the positive side is sulfide metallurgy. If Newton can make it work, private land makes it easier to permit, water and power access. If they do a deal with the town of Casa Grande to actually use their sewage, basically brown water, that's non-potable in their processing facilities, they would have more access to water than they actually need. And so having access to more water than you need also makes you a good target for a company. And then obviously the drill results. They can hang on both sides. And so here you can see the laramide age porphyries, 55 to 75 million years, are very important in this part of southwest Arizona. We flew, my family, from Miami to LA when we were coming back. And the amount of open pits that you see in this part of the world are incredible. You got a very large mine that I was involved with Phelps Dodge was Morenci, and Safford was one that they were permitting when I was there. Lone Star is one of Phelps Dodge's new development stories. Gunnison is the in situ leach project. Excelsior, Florence is Tasico's in situ leach. San Manuel was a big porphyry for BHP. You got the Mission Mine here, Sarita. So you got these big, huge porphyry belts, and then right here is Cactus, and that's Casa Grande. So the nearest project to them is actually Florence. This is solvent extraction electrowinning, the same, but this is in situ. So they are actually going to pump the acid into the ground like Gunnison to get the solution out and then treat it. So their grade's like 0.3. The stuff that these guys are looking at is more like 1% in terms of the enriched. So here is a nice little magnetic survey. Okay, this is a nice magnetic survey. So where we have these magnetic highs, is where we don't have alteration. And so the important thing is getting this, what we call phyllic alteration, this quartz sericite pyrite alteration, that basically creates these magnetic lows. So the open pit where they mined before is right there. Where they're trying to infill and getting some results is right to the northeast. That's the property boundary. And then really the growth here is in this other mag low that there's no resource on, which is Park Salyer. And then Ivanhoe Electric is right to the south. Okay, and so this is what this looks like. So when somebody tells you something's leached, somebody tells you something's enriched, something is hypogene, so there's two things. There's hypogene and supergene. Hypogene would be this, the primary ore. That for them is low grade, 0.3, 0.4%. Higher grade in Park Salyer than Cactus. This is not what they're looking at to mine. But this is what Newton, Rio Tinto's arm, is looking to treat to see if it is economic. Not sending it to a smelter as a concentrate, but actually leaching it on site and making cathode. So what happens with this proto-ore is that it makes it to the surface as you have erosion. So let's imagine the erosion's there. And so what happens is groundwater that brings oxygen hits the proto-ore. And what it brings is oxygen oxidizes these sulfides, generates sulfuric acid. And the sulfuric acid basically leaches the chalcopyrite, puts the copper into solution, and then when it hits the water table, it produces a new mineral, chalcocite. And chalcocite versus chalcopyrite, chalcocite brings you more copper than a chalcopyrite. So it's basically giving you enrichment. But it doesn't happen just once. The older a porphyry is, it can happen several times. So your proto-ore or your primary can grade 0.3, but your supergene can grade 1, can grade 1.5 times. It's definitely a constricted layer, but that can be huge. So what that looks like is this would be the oxide ore, which would be basically the leached but oxidized. That's leachable, that's soluble. So whenever you're looking at a solvent extraction electrowinning project like this is, you don't care about the total copper, you care about the soluble copper, because that's the stuff they can treat. They can't treat the sulfide. But this is the primary stuff. Okay, that's what Rio Tinto's interested. What the company's interested is in this. So not only do you have the supergene process, but post-mineral, what's happened is this thing was maybe flat, and then we had a lot of post-mineral faulting, extension. So all these blocks were dropped. So all that layer cake stuff is all over the place. That's what they're drilling right now. Unfortunately, now these targets are mostly underground, except for the Cactus pit actually got close to the surface. That's why it was open pit. But all this other stuff's going to be underground. Okay, but when this was done, it was probably 50, 60 cents per pound. When they're looking at doing this, we're talking about $3 a pound. So what they're looking at is all these enriched and oxide zones, but this is all under a post-mineral conglomerate cover. Okay? That's what they're drilling. So what does that look like? So if you look at the open pit, you can see it plainly. So that's that fault that down dips all the mineralization. And this is your post-mineral cover that's got nothing. So that's in the open pit. What they're doing is looking at this, but now we're up here, and then we got to deal with the post-mineral recovery, and then that's what we're drilling. This doesn't come that close to surface. So if we look at the upside, and that's what we're interested in, so you've got the indicated and inferred for what Ivanhoe Electric have right now, but they've been drilling with 6 rigs. And so they've got about 10 billion pounds, sorry. But they've got more primary than oxide and enriched. So their grade soluble, like they've only got 30, 40% that's soluble. Most of their stuff is sulfide, but they got a decent sulfide grade. What these guys have, what Arizona Sonora is, they've got much more soluble. So they've got more stuff that they could solve in extraction electrowinning, which would start an operation. Right now, they're sitting probably on 3.5 billion pounds. But the thing is that Park Salyer, the exploration target, could get them up to 5.7. So in my math, right now, from what I'm getting with the drilling, is my number might be small. That two and a half that I'm thinking might be three and a half. So my 5 to 6 might be 6.5. And the other thing is this 10 could be 15. So once we're talking about 20 billion pounds of copper, that's no longer a district for an intermediate producer or a junior. That's a BHP or a Rio Tinto thing. That's what excites me about this story. Wow, I ran out of time already. Jesus. Okay, you got another 5-10 minutes with me. Don't worry, I won't be quick. So the interesting thing about Casa Grande is from when I lived there, I don't want to say it was a meth lab, but you get my idea. So, but now it's all about business development. So they built this Lucid Motors and EV factory, and now they've basically funded a phase 2 expansion plan that was approved in 2021. So they're really, the ease of doing business is remarkable here if you're dealing with the state and the community. And you get an idea with respect to the infrastructure that's already at site between the previous tailings, where they actually filmed a movie here, Three Kings, thinking that was Iraq. Tailings pond, who would have thought? So anyway, so they've got infrastructure, and that's that story. So we'll move on quickly to the next one, which I was just at. That was my last site visit, would have been Western Alaska Minerals. And so this I would consider maybe a multi-decade overnight success, where it was run by 2 geologists who were involved in Alaska, Donlin Creek, Greens Creek, Ambler District, which would have been, which is now Trilogy and South 32, run as a private company for 10 years. The 2 geologists decided to consolidate their land package, which is about 55,000 acres. And the actual initial goal was just to restart an oxide heap leach project called Illinois Creek that I had no interest in. But then they also wanted to target the other targets that people had spent some time on but never followed up on, which was the CRD, which is a carbonate replacement deposit, which is like your Hermosa deposit that was, purchased cash, a couple $2 billion by South 32 for the Taylor deposit. So I took part in this private placement. So I own both Arizona, Sonora, and Western Alaska. The catalysts right now are 6,000 meters of drilling with results. And they're hoping to do a much bigger project in 2023. And so it was doing next to nothing until it hit 2 zones of 47 meters and 101 meters of massive sulfides. That's what spiked the stock. But because we're dealing with 6 to 8 weeks and sometimes longer assay turnaround times, they can't hold on to that kind of information in 6 to 8 weeks. They released the visuals, but we're still waiting for those results. And that's the core. I saw some of it. So this company is like 127 million US enterprise value. It's up 240% year to date, mostly because of those results. I own it. Great management team. Flagship project would be this Water Pump Creek. Site visit was done, like I said, just recently in August. It's a lead zinc silver play, but really it's got a lot of silver where they are in the CRD profile. Risks, do these drill results, get close to what people were expecting with the 41 and 100 meters? Field season limits. You're definitely dealing with April to the end of September. If you're lucky, remote. Again, drill results on both sides, because if they come back and kill it, that'd be great. Critical minerals like lead and zinc. Management team, lots of experience in Alaska, and the property package. So this is a CRD model by Peter McGraw. So basically, what this hole 18, which hit the 101 meters, might have gone down as one of these chimneys. So a CRD deposit is generated by an intrusive body. Could be a porphyry. That porphyry could develop a skarn, which is really high temperature right on its edges. But then distally, like we're talking a couple of kilometers away, we could develop something that's more passive, involves the dissolution of the carbonates and the deposition of massive sulfides, which would be your CRDs, which could follow the stratigraphy or generate chimneys or mantos. So that's what they're drilling as we speak. So this is where the project is. So believe it or not, the Yukon River comes right back around, and that would be your proposed barge facility. This winter road was used by this Illinois Creek Oxide Gold Project. The actual project that they're drilling right now is water pump. The creeks around, the camps around here, and they do have an airstrip. Where is it? Okay. So here's some nice pictures. So it's about a caravan ride. It's about an hour and a half to this town of Caltag, and that's the Yukon River right now. Your barge access would probably be on the eastern side of that. This is a town of maybe 100, 150 people. Take a chopper, which is an unusual chopper. I've never flown in one of those before, to Caltag, which is about 20 minutes. That's the 40-person camp. This is their airstrip that we couldn't land on because it was soaked with water because we had a lot of rain. And then this is the northeast trending Illinois Creek pit, high strip, that they took copper and gold out of. But importantly, this is the same structure that the CRD at water pump is also using. So if you look at it in terms of the map, that was the open pit you were looking at. That's that structure that goes right up to this graben, which is called the Water Pump Creek Graben. This is the manto that so far they know about. This is what it looks like in terms of that little bit, looks like this. So they've been drilling here, 10 meters, 20 meters, whatever, and then here is where they're starting to hit the 100 meters. So that's what this looks like in long section, north to south. And so this is what they're drilling. They're drilling through barren schist. They get through this thrust fault, and then they hit this massive sulfide that they didn't know about. They just kept drilling. This wasn't geophysics or anything like that. This was just systematic drilling down this structure. And so this is what we're going to look at in core. I'm just speeding because I got to move. So this would be an unaltered schist that you'd go through in all the sections. Then you go through this graphitic schist, which basically represents that thrust fault. Then you start seeing these, what they call fugitive calcite veins. And this is when the system, those fluids that are bringing the base metals and the silver, are pushing out the calcite, because that's what's being replaced. And then you get these fugitive veins that don't have anything, but are being pushed out of that system as it dissolves the calcite. And then you could see this great in ultraviolet light. And so they have a UV right just to see that. So that's basically this, like that. Then you hit the massive sulfide, massive zinc, and then late stage that comes after this sphalerite is blue tinged galena. And that's what's bringing all the silver. And that's massive. There's no room for anything else here. And then below it is that oxidized manto that's right underneath, which is kind of unusual to have the oxidation below it. So there must be some kind of aquifer down there that's above the water table or something. Okay, so summary conclusions. So depressed market conditions, optimal time to go on site visits and do some bargain hunting. And I made 10 site visits, and these are the two companies I added for all the reasons I stated. So I'll conclude there, okay? And thank you for listening.